G'day everyone and welcome back to the Australian Reptile Park. We hope you're all staying safe at home. It's a beautiful, beautiful afternoon here at the Reptile Park. The sun is shining and I'm out in the main park area with some kangaroos. It's right on cue. Now, I am one of the reptile keepers here at the park and you're probably wondering why as a reptile keeper I'm going to be talking to you about kangaroos. That's a very valid question, but I do know a little bit, and they are of course a phenomenal animal. They're not quite as cool as Kraken the Komodo dragon, I don't think, but there is lots to talk about. Now, kangaroos, they are one of our favourites here at the Reptile Park, and of course they don't have their own exhibit, so to speak. They're quite the free rangers. They live out here in the main park area, and of course we love all of our guests when we're able to have guests here at the park to be able to get nice and close to these beautiful animals. Now, of course, our kangaroos here at the Reptile Park, and any kangaroo that you're going to see at any wildlife park, is going to be much more friendly and well adapted to people than a wild one would. If you try to get too close to a wild kangaroo, it will hop away. So having these really friendly, a lot of these are hand raised as well, these really placid kangaroos, is a really great way for people to get nice and up close to these animals and really learn about them and have a nice close look at them. Now, what we're looking at here this afternoon is two different species. We've got this one here, this darker kind of chocolate coloured one. That's the Kangaroo Island kangaroo. They are of course from Kangaroo Island off the coast of South Australia, and they're actually a subspecies of the Western grey kangaroo. And then the other one that we have here at the Reptile Park is the very common Eastern grey kangaroo that you might find locally here along the east coast. Now, kangaroos, they are extremely well adapted to the Australian landscape. Of course, Australia, it's not the most pleasant place in the world to live for many animals. It is a very harsh, arid landscape, but kangaroos, they are superbly adapted to that. They've got some very special adaptations. One of those is, of course, their feet. As we know, kangaroos, they're macropods, and that word macropod quite literally translates to long foot. And the kangaroo has evolved to move around in a very effective and efficient way, and it's very almost unique to the macropods. They hop. Most people know that kangaroos hop around, and it's really a very efficient way of moving around. Now, because Australia is quite harsh and kangaroos often live in some of the most arid parts of the country, they may go extreme distances having to find food or suitable water. And so that method of hopping along the ground with those long, robust legs really enables them to travel enormous distances without expending anywhere near as much energy as another animal would. Now, they've also, of course, got these beautiful big ears, and they do actually have the ability to rotate those ears. This one's been a little bit cheeky, gone straight for the bucket. They do have the ability to rotate the ears 180 degrees, so they can point them forward, or they can point them backward, as this one is doing right here, just to get really a holistic view of what's going on around them. And they do have extremely sensitive hearing. They've also got beautiful big eyes, reasonably good eyesight, but in saying that, they are primarily nocturnal. And I guess a big part of the reason for that would be that Australia gets very, very hot, particularly during summer. Some of these species are living out in, as I mentioned, some very remote parts of the country, so it is simply too hot to be doing anything during the day. They are out at night or sometimes at dawn or dusk. That's actually a really common time to see roos on the move, and we call that the crepuscular. That refers to an animal that's most active at dawn or dusk. Now, if they are caught out in the middle of the day and it's really, really hot, they do, of course, have an adaptation to deal with that. And what they actually do, they will lick their arms. They've got these arms here, their forearms. You can see those clawed hands there. And by licking their arms, they actually wet their fur, and they basically almost expose their, they've got all these fine capillaries in their arms. And what happens as evaporation occurs, as that saliva evaporates, that will cool the blood in those capillaries, and that actually cools their body down a bit. So it's a really efficient way of cooling themselves down. If that's not enough, then they might even dig into the ground a little bit and kind of splash some of the wetter soil a little bit deeper down onto themselves as well. So they've got a bunch of different things that they can do. And as I mentioned, they are just superbly adapted to our Australian landscape, and they really are the quintessential Australian animal. Very famous, very iconic. You see them on the coat of arms, they're on the Qantas plane. There is really not much that is more Australian than a kangaroo. They are a spectacular animal.
Do we have any babies here at the moment?
We do. We've got a few mums with bubs, and what we might do, we're going to we'll walk over to a beautiful small female Kangaroo Island kangaroo. She's just sitting on her own over there with her bub, and just before she was letting me get nice and close. So let's see if we can walk over to her, and maybe we'll get lucky enough to see a glimpse of her joey. We're going to pass another one on the way past. This is the girl I'm talking about just here. She might be interested in a little bit of sweet potato here. I think she's going to be. Yep, definitely. Now, just before we talk about our joey, let's see if we can try and see their teeth. You'll notice as she opens her mouth there a little bit, you might be able to see the teeth. They have these big teeth right at the front, and then of course they have some smaller teeth at the back. And what that enables them to do is get right down. They can get right to the base of a shoot or some grass, rip it out, and then those teeth at the back there are going to chomp it up before it goes down and starts to be digested. So they really are quite well adapted to grazing. That's what a kangaroo is designed for doing, grazing on grasses and shoots. Now, I'll see if this girl's going to pop up a little bit, because we can see one foot poking out there and a couple of ear tips as well. That is her beautiful, beautiful joey. Now, this one is still a little bit on the small side. It's not to the size where it's going to be independent from mum. That can take in excess of a year. Right now, that joey's really well protected inside that pouch, and why would it want to go anywhere else? It might come for a little bit of a hop around, but of course it's going to stick very close to mum. It's not going to leave her, and it can pop straight back in there whenever it wants to. Now, of course, you can see that distinctive marsupial pouch. That is where a joey, which is what a baby kangaroo is called, that's where it's going to go through that first stage of development. But when a joey is born, it does not look like what's inside that pouch. It is much, much smaller, extremely underdeveloped young. They're about the size of a jelly bean, maybe a little bit smaller. And when it's first born, all that joey will have is its front legs. It's blind, it's got no back legs, and what it actually has to do is take quite a treacherous journey up mum's stomach and make its way into the pouch, all on its own. It's pretty incredible. And it does have to go up as well. So it's going to go against the force of gravity. It wants to go up, and it's instinctually going to head into that pouch and attach itself to a teat. And for the average joey, that whole journey is going to take about 3 minutes. So it's a fairly long time for a very tiny, bald, vulnerable joey to be exposed like that. But if it can get itself inside the pouch there and attach itself to that teat, it will rapidly begin to develop, and it's going to have a very, very good chance at survival. And in fact, they really don't come out of the pouch at all for maybe the first 6 months or so. Now, once they get a bit of development to them, they start to get their ears and they open their eye. That's when they'll start to kind of poke their head out, have a bit of a look at the world, their first look. And then, of course, when they're really developed and they think they're strong enough to be able to hop around a bit on their own, that is when they will venture out of the pouch for the first time. And of course, eventually there comes a time where they will be completely weaned from mum, and they'll go off on their own. Now, in saying that, kangaroos are fairly social animals. In fact, the eastern grey kangaroo has been said to be the most sociable of all the Australian marsupials. So they do tend to stick together a fair bit, and a group of kangaroos is actually called a mob, and they typically have in excess of 10 individuals in that mob. Now, of course, you get a nice mix. You'll have mums like this with joeys. You might have females with no joeys that are a bit younger perhaps, and then you're going to have quite a few boys as well. Now, there's a bit of a hierarchy that goes on. A big male kangaroo is an extremely strong animal, and he has breeding rights. He gets to breed with all the females, mate with those girls, and he really rules the roost, so to speak. And if a younger male that thinks he's pretty strong as well wants to come up and take that big male on, that's when things can get pretty interesting. I'm sure you've all seen footage of kangaroos, male roos, boxing. They stand right on their back legs. They'll use their tail for balance, which they use when they're hopping along as well. And then they'll kick their their feet right out. They've got those claws as well. They're not off limits either. They can gouge eyes, go for the neck. They're pretty brutal when it comes to that male dominant combat. But yeah, usually the bigger male, he kicks the younger boy around a little bit, and usually he gets to stick being the head honcho until he maybe gets a little bit older, and then he might get booted out of his position. But yeah, those big male roos are quite impressive. And in fact, we've got a few over there. They're munching on some food. We might leave this female be. And just to finish up, let's go over and have a look at some big boys.
If you guys want to send in a couple of questions, we'll ask them of Jake in a few minutes. Oh, wow, they've really converged over here in our absence.
So this is a male. You can see the size difference between the boys and the girls. So they are sexually dimorphic by size, like a lot of animals. And this big boy, his name is Bruce. Now, if we look at Bruce, he's too focused on the food. Let's come around here. We might actually have a look at this big boy as well. If you look at their arms, they're extremely muscular. They have big biceps, big pectoral muscles, and of course their chest area is really designed for taking the hit from another kangaroo's legs. So they are extremely powerful and strong, and yeah, they are really designed for that combat that they go through, particularly during breeding season when they're fighting over the girls. Typical males, the girls, they always make them lose their mind a little bit, and yeah, they will certainly fight for those best females in the mob. There's a slightly smaller one there, very inquisitive.
I think that's Tim Tam, one of our joeys from last year.
Another one coming through. Yeah, you can see this one's quite obviously a smaller individual. She's perhaps 2 years old now, and getting a bit of size on her now. She's certainly grown a fair bit in the last year, and she's almost kind of at that stage where she is fairly independent, but still, of course, sticking with the mob.
So you're feeding them sweet potato and carrots today. What's their diet like in the wild, and do you usually feed them this?
So they get a good mix of things. As I mentioned before, they are a grazing animal, so most of their time in the wild they're going to be grazing on grasses and perhaps some vegetation, but yeah, for the most part it's a fairly plain, low nutrient diet, and they're just grazing all day long to kind of allow for that. Now in captivity, of course, we do like to give them the occasional treat, and they certainly got that today. There's a reason there's so many roos congregating right now. It's because we basically bought out some chocolate and lollies for them. They love their sweet potato and their carrots, so yeah, everyone's going to try and get a bite if they can. But most of the time what they're feeding on is either the grass in the park area, that's why we have to replace it every year, but we also feed them hay as well. So yeah, they go through that natural grazing process here. They just get the occasional treat.
How long can kangaroos live for?
So obviously quite different depending on whether you're in captivity or in the wild. There's a lot of pressures that wild kangaroos face. A massive one of those is vehicles. You see roadkill kangaroos way too frequently. Of course, they like to hang out on roads, particularly at that dusk time of day. So a lot of them do get hit. But in captivity, where there's no threat of predators or being hit by cars, not really too many pressures on them, they get a pretty good life here. They could live 20 years, but I guess probably the average lifespan in the wild might be a half of that.
You touched on it a little bit before, but can you just go over again the difference between boys and girls?
Yeah, absolutely. So the main difference has got to do with the size, and you see that in a lot of species. Koalas are the same, a lot of reptiles. The males, they get larger, as you can see this big boy here. And the reason for that is simply that they are combating. They're fighting over territory and over females, so being that larger size enables them to be that little bit more powerful, and that way they can really hold their own in a fight.
Wonderful. And last question, what do they use their tails for?
So they'll use their tails mainly for balance. You'll see when they hop along, they really use it. But as I mentioned before, when those males are fighting, or even the joeys, they'll play fight as well and muck around with each other when they're young. they actually use their tails for balance when they're doing that as well. So they'll stand right up, nice and tall. They'll use their tail behind them to balance, and then they can actually just stand straight on their tail and kick out with both of their back legs. So it's quite impressive to watch. And it is extremely powerful, very strong. And yeah, it is of course absolutely necessary for them to have that tail. Without it, they'd be a funny looking animal and they wouldn't be able to get around all that well. Alrighty guys, well we might finish up with this nice comparison of the two species that we have here at the park, the Kangaroo Island kangaroo here and the Eastern Grey kangaroo. They're all here, they're all waiting for you to come back and visit them. We're keeping them entertained in the meantime, but I'm sure they cannot wait for you guys to be back here patting them and feeding them. They love that. Alrighty guys, well thanks so much for tuning in. We saw some kangaroos, learned a little bit about them from a reptile keeper, and we'll see you next time. Thanks guys.